I will share my screen. Okay, everybody can see. Perfect. So, today we're going to talk about best practices for home composting. And I've given this talk a lot. And as I've given this talk, it's kind of led me into the direction of now we have a new waste management director here in Newton County, and they're interested in doing a countywide composting type practice. And so eventually I'm going to be going to Athens-Clarke County, who already has a countywide composting program, and we're going to try to implement something like that here in Newton County. So composting has led to big things. This is my information. I'm the A&R agent and CEC here in Newton County, and that's my email. So feel free to shoot me an email if you have any sort of questions about composting. So today we're going to talk about what is composting and why do it, efficient composting materials, composting structures, preparing the pile, maintaining the pile, and suggested uses. So Brooklyn does have a poll posted, so make sure you answer that question. Right now it looks like we're at about 50-50 for participants who currently compost. 50% says yes and 50% says no. So the earth is what we all have in common. So that's our common ground for the day, and we want to do what we can to protect it and preserve it. So what to compost. Mature compost is a stable material that is broken down from organic matter, and it has a content called humus, which is a dark brown or black soil-like earthy smell substance. And it's created using high temperatures that destroy the pathogens, weed seeds, and fungal, things that, natural decomposition does not destroy. Natural decomposition kind of occurs on the surface. It kind of happens with the leaves and things like that are directly on the surface. So, nature does recycle, and eventually over time, those leaves and plants and animals and things like that return to the forest floor. And if we rake the leaves, that soil is robbed of those nutrients. So when I always just blow my leaves back kind of underneath the trees and use them as a natural mulch. In my backyard, it's probably split 50-50. We have a really giant oak tree that's beautiful, and and then the other half is like a grassy, or zoysia grass lawn. So the leaves that drop, we just leaf blow those back into the woods, and it creates a nice, beautiful leaf mulch area. So, one of the reasons to compost is so that we prevent that debris from going into our stormwater. And same thing with grass clippings. It irks me when people are mowing their yard and they're just blowing it onto the road, and I'm like, oh, it's just gonna, blow away, or when it rains, it's just gonna wash away, and all those nutrients are gonna be carried away. So you want to compost those things, to help return those nutrients back to your soil, back to your lawn, back to your garden. And if you've been fertilizing your yard, then there may be excess nutrients and pesticides, and those can be carried into our waterways. And too many nutrients can cause algal blooms and fish kills, and loss of other aquatic life. So we want to make sure that we're preventing that. So about 28% is organic waste, such as yard trimmings and vegetable fruit scraps that end up in the waste stream. So we want to try to reduce that number. Organic waste takes up space in the landfill, and as it decomposes there, the nutrients are just there and they're lost. They're buried so deep in the ground in the landfill, they're not going to be of use anytime in the future. So in 2018, it was estimated by the EPA that 2.6 million tons of food was composted. We can increase that number. And that number probably has been increased with all of our educational and awareness efforts. So those of you that don't currently compost, here are some benefits of composting. It does reduce the need for chemical fertilizers. It does not completely eliminate them. In some cases it can, but it does, add those nutrients back into the soil. It also enhances water retention. It enriches the soil to help maintain that moisture, suppress plant diseases and pests. It provides carbon sequestration, and it reduces the methane emission from landfills and lowers your carbon footprint. That's kind of all of our goal across all areas and aspects of life, is to reduce your carbon footprint. And then it increases that beneficial bacteria and fungi in your garden. So it helps create humus, which is that nutrient-filled material. So requirements for composting. Number one is oxygen. We want to make sure, it is not necessarily, well, there is a way to do it anaerobically, but, oxygen is required for microbes to decompose that organic waste efficiently. So you have to mix your pile. If you have a really large pile, you have to mix your pile once or twice a month to provide that necessary oxygen. Next is moisture. A dry compost will not decompose efficiently. So making sure that you have proper moisture and providing the growth of those microorganisms will ensure a quicker compost. Then particle size. If you take a giant stick, it's going to take forever to decompose. But if you ran it through a chipper, or you had shavings that were even smaller, that's going to increase your efficiency. And then finally, temperature. Low outside temperatures slow the activity down. You can still compost over the winter, it's just a lot slower. But warmer temperatures in the summertime going to speed it up. So those are kind of the 4 requirements for composting. Now, to have efficient composting, you want a carbon to nitrogen ratio that is 30:1. So 30 parts carbon, 1 part nitrogen. And, when they don't have the proper diet of carbon, the organisms may lose nitrogen to the atmosphere as ammonia. So if you get it a little too hot, then you're just kind of wasting all of that nitrogen. So you want to make sure you keep your carbon to nitrogen ratio at that 30:1. So, and then if the compost isn't properly decomposed, it'll be high in carbon and will use nitrogen from the soil to continue composting. So if you rush it and you don't have it completely composted, you add it into your garden, it will rob nitrogen from the soil that you have there in your garden to finish breaking down. So we don't want to do that. You want to make sure that you allow it time and you have the correct ratio to have a really high quality compost. So you want to ensure that you have optimal microbial activity through aeration of your whole pile, or whichever structure or way that you decide to compost. Anaerobic composting is slow and may be smelly. And we will talk a little bit about anaerobic composting. And anaerobic composting just means that there is no oxygen in the process. And dry compost will definitely not decompose efficiently, so you want to keep it damp but not soggy. And smaller particle size equals faster. You want to make sure that you're chipping, shredding, mowing, etc. So here are some examples of organisms that we find in composting. You have your chemical decomposers like your bacteria, your fungi, protozoa, single-celled organisms, things like that. And then our physical decomposers are like millipedes and sow bugs and slugs and snails, earthworms. So those are our physical decomposers. And then we do have some inoculates that could benefit but are not required. So some of those include enzymes, hormones, bacterial activators, but researchers found that those starters or additives are usually not necessary. So here are some examples of the carbon to nitrogen ratio. Alfalfa hay has a very high nitrogen content. It is a legume, so it's going to be a 12-to-1 carbon to nitrogen ratio. Lots of nitrogen there. Grass clippings are a 19-to-1, so they're really kind of good to add in every so often, but you don't want a pile of just grass clippings. Just grass clippings are not that optimal 30-to-1 ratio. Fruit waste is 35-to-1. It's very close. So fruit waste is very good to add to your compost. It keeps it at that good 30-to-1 ratio. Leaves are about a 60-to-1. Sawdust is 500-to-1, and then wood is 700-to-1. So lots of range there. And we want to make sure that we don't add too much wood or sawdust to our pile. Browns and greens. So I do an activity where we take some brown paper and some green paper, or brown Play-Doh and green Play-Doh, and we do it a 30-to-1 and we mix it together and see what it looks like. And it turns out really great. So when I say carbon, I mean browns. That's your leaves, your branches, your twigs, your materials that have a high carbon content. And then your greens are your grass clippings, vegetable waste, and even coffee grounds. So here's a really nice list of what to compost: fruits and vegetables, eggshells, coffee grounds, and filters. With the filters, though, make sure that it does say that it is compostable or recyclable. We don't want to be putting any sort of, plastic or whatever in our compost pile. Tea bags, again, making sure that they are compostable on the label. Shredded newspaper, cardboard, yard trimmings, house plants. Raise your hand if you've ever killed a house plant. I have. My puppy actually killed my Dracaena 2 weeks ago. She just chewed the top of it off, and I'm like, ugh. So I'm trying to do clippings from it. So we'll see what happens. Maybe a miracle will happen. Cotton and wool rags, those are going to take a lot longer to decompose, but it can be done. Hair and fur, fireplace ashes, those can all be added to your compost pile. What not to compost? Meat, fats, fish, dairy. So those are going to create odor problems. It's going to attract pests like flies and rodents. You do not want to do that. And then next, diseased or insect-ridden plants. These plants or these diseases might survive and be transferred back to another plant. So it's best to just either burn those plants or, take them off the property, put them in a trash can, something like that. Pet wastes definitely can contain parasites, bacteria, germs, or pathogens. So we want to make sure we avoid those zoonotic diseases and we're not putting that back into our yard. And then also yard trimmings treated with chemical pesticides. So it might kill the beneficial organisms. And you want to just avoid that altogether, because really, ultimately, we use the compost in our gardens. So we want to make sure that it's a nice, clean compost and we're not, having any residual chemicals left over. Sometimes those chemicals can have, 2-3 years of residual effect. So one example of that is there's a farm here in Newton County, and they're like, free horse manure, free compost, come get it. And it's great, people love it, but then they call me and they wonder why their tomatoes are dying. And I'm not saying that this farm does it. This farm actually does a great job, but some horse farms spray their pastures with Grazon, which is a 2,4-D product. It works great for the pastures. It eliminates the weeds. It's safe for the horses to graze through. However, it transfers into their manure. And if you try to compost that and put it in your garden, that residual effect is going to kill your tomatoes, which are very sensitive to 2,4-D. So you have to be very careful about where you get your compost components from. And, manure is great to add to your compost, but you want to make sure that you source it from an equine farm that, hasn't recently sprayed, or, just be very careful about where you get your equine manure from. So let's talk about some ways to compost. This is like the wet it and forget it kind of thing, where you just put you like fill up a garbage bag and you seal it up, you stick it in your basement or set it aside or whatever, forget about it. And in about 6 months to a year, that bag becomes a really nice, good compost that's available for you to put back in your garden. It requires very little maintenance, but because the oxygen is limited, I wouldn't say it's like completely anaerobic. Some oxygen gets in through the hand or the top. The process is really, really slow. So, it says 6 months to a year. I mean, you're really looking at a year to a year and a half, because, that's gonna take a lot more time. One of the things is we do like to add a tablespoon of garden fertilizer with a high nitrogen content, because a lot of times, there isn't enough nitrogen already in there. So you just add that tablespoon of nitrogen to help give it a boost. Another one that I've recently, have started doing, I really just have a big pile and, in our backyard, and we throw everything in it. It's down behind our building, but you just dig a trench about 12 inches deep, throw the items in and mix it with soil. And then in a few months, the, rotted material will have been incorporated into the soil, and you can either plant above them, or you can kind of dig it out and move it to your garden area. So this works really well because all of those bacterium and decomposers that we talked about are already found in the soil. So when you put your fresh materials in there, it's just going to compost really quickly. So that one's a kind of a lazy man way to do it too. Now, if you want to get really scientific and have really high quality, good compost, these 3 structures are, the way to go. They're going to offer you a little bit more science and precision when you're composting. And the first one we're going to talk about is the barrel or the drum. This one, it comes in all different sizes. You can make your own, like this diagram here with a 55-gallon drum. You can buy them off of Amazon or whatever, the internet, and they come in plastic drums like that with a lid and holes. And so if you're making one at home, you want to drill holes in it to provide oxygen. You can see in this one down here, it has holes in it for oxygen. And it says every few days, turn the drum on its side and roll it around. You can do that once a week. Just kick it over, roll it around in a circle, and then set it back on its stand. And I say set it on its stand because you don't really want it on the ground, because that's just another area pocket that's not getting oxygen. So you want to make sure that you allow the air to penetrate. And you can remove the lid after you turn it. However, if it's going to be like a big rain, a big deluge, you don't want it to get too wet, put the lid back on. So this, kind of requires a little bit of maintenance, a little bit of tending, but you're going to have really high quality compost in about 2 to 4 months. in the summertime. That time will probably extend in the winter, but it's an excellent choice for a small backyard. And setups like this where you just like tumble it a couple times over and over, you don't even have to roll it and pick it up, are very user friendly. Next is the circular bin. I've seen a lot of these on older farms that I go to. They just chunk all of their yard waste. You can see in this one there's a layer of leaves and a layer of grass and maybe some food waste and some sticks. So you take a length of woven wire fencing and you put it in a circle and you put some snaps on it. And with this design, it's easy to turn the compost material because you take the material, or you take the fence off of it, set it in a new place like next to it, and then you just shovel it all back in. So it does require work, but lots of aeration occurs, lots of ways for it to retain its moisture and get moisture from, the rain or whatnot. So it's gonna go a lot faster, but it requires a lot of work. I mean, I'm not a fan of this kind because I just don't like to deal with fence. Like when I'm fencing, it makes me mad anyways, and so this just reminds me of fencing. So this one, however, is actually really cool. And when I was teaching high school agriculture, my dad and I actually built one of these bins out next to my greenhouse. And this is a system where you can crank out a lot of compost, and it allows for good circulation, and it's kind of 3 steps. So you have your beginning step, which turns into your second step, which turns into your final finished compost. And it's best to use rot resistant wood. The one pictured here, I think, is made out of that, it's like a composite wood. So you want to make sure that you are keeping that bin turned and keeping it, I guess every, 3 to 5 days, you want to allow it to heat up, depending on how much material you have in there, and turn it into the next bin for another, week or so, and then flip it into the last bin and let it finish there. So if you feel like you have a lot of compost, or if you have a neighborhood that you guys can all partner together, that is a great structure to have kind of in a community location. And I think that's what this structure is located in, is a community garden area. And you can put all of your compost there. So when you're thinking about a location for your compost, put it somewhere where it will be used often. I will say mine, I used to compost a lot, like 2018, 2019, 2020. And then I kind of forgot about it because it was down behind my building. And then my husband parked his trailer there, so it was kind of hard to get to. And then I had a baby, and so I'm thinking that we might have to, relocate our compost pile. So I'll have to talk with my husband about that tonight. He's gonna be like, "Oh gosh, Ashley, I thought we were over that." But if you don't put it in a place where you don't see it every day, it's easy to forget. And sometimes I like to have. Well, I'll go back to this. Sometimes I'll have like a little, especially if I'm like cleaning out my refrigerator, your little container of blueberries gets stuck in the way back and you forget about them, and then you see them like 4 weeks later and you're like, oh no, and they're shriveled up, and put them in your compost. That'd be great. Add it to your compost. So there is a container that you can buy from Amazon. It's like a little box, little green box with a lid. And some people just keep it on their counter when they're cooking. If they take their potato peels and their excess onion or whatever else, and put it into that little green container, and every week or whatever they just take it to their compost pile and dump it in it and give it a rinse out and bring it back in the house. So when you are preparing the pile, it's really like a lasagna. You just kind of layer things up, and you want to start with your coarse material on the bottom, because that's going to allow for air circulation at the base of the pile, kind of create a chimney effect as it goes up. Then you want to do your organic waste. So your leaves, grass clippings, fruits and vegetables, things like that. This layer should be watered until moist, but not soggy. So if you have lots of like dried out grass clippings or lots of leaves, it might require a little bit more water than all fresh grass clippings. And then on top of that, you want to add soil or completed compost already. By doing that, it ensures that the pile is inoculated with composting microbes already, and it just speeds up the process. Instead of them having to figure out how to come from the bottom ground that's already up, or if you're in a barrel, it's just kind of a sterile environment with no inoculates. Adding that soil in there will definitely inoculate it and make sure that those microbes are there. And then next, adding about 2 to 3 inches of livestock manure or a nitrogen fertilizer, at 1/3 cup for every 25 square feet of surface area is good. So making sure that you have that nitrogen, because a lot of times, we have lots of leaves, we have lots of sticks, or lots of grass, and we just don't have enough nitrogen in our system. So, going ahead and adding that nitrogen fertilizer is going to help. So when this was the activity I did with the green and white paper, or green and red paper and brown paper. Okay. Maintaining the compost pile. At a minimum, you want to turn your pile once a month. Hey, DJ, do you mind to close the door, please? Thank you so much. Appreciate it. So, to prevent odors and hasten decomposition, turning it also exposes seeds, insect larvae, and pathogens to the middle. So, sometimes those pathogens can be on the outside and they can survive, but if you turn it and make sure it's all incorporated, they're going to get to the middle at some point and die. Also, you want to try to keep it moist to make sure that it's not too wet, not too dry, and you will see some shrinking and settling. So leaves, for instance, will shrink to approximately 30% of their original volume. So a well-managed compost pile with shredded materials under warm conditions can be ready in about 2 to 4 months. So if you start composting, in April, by July, August, you should have really, really nice compost to add to your garden. So let's talk about some problems that you will come up with. One thing that I have seen for me is the center is too dry. That's always been my problem, is I just, don't have enough moisture, and I don't have enough nitrogen to keep it heating up. And so we like for it to be hot. Hot is good. But some people have a bad odor. If it smells like it's rotting, that is not good. You typically either have added something that you weren't supposed to, or it's not getting enough air. So what you want to do is, turn the material, add some dry material to it if it's too wet, and let it dry out a little bit. And then, if you have a compost pile and it's only warm in the middle, it's not really radiating a lot of heat throughout, your compost pile is too small. Make it bigger. Add more material and mix in the old ingredients with the new ingredients into a pile. And then for me, like I said, if the pile's not heating up, it's a lack of nitrogen, mix in nitrogen sources like fresh grass clippings, fresh manure, or blood meal. So for those of you that are wanting to, maybe do it naturally, organically, and you don't want to use a commercialized chemical fertilizer, you can add in blood meal, which is a good source of nitrogen, or that fresh manure, which is a good source of nitrogen as well. So uses for compost. We all have uses for compost. I'm just not the best at waiting for it. I'm not patient enough, but I think compost is great. It improves the physical, chemical, and biological properties of the soil, and you use it to amend the top 1 to 2 inches of your soil. So you lay it down 1 to 2 inches, incorporate it in, and it's going to add organic matter, nutrients, all of that stuff to your garden area. You can also use it as a potting mix. Mix it in at a 1 to 4 or 1 to 3 ratio, and mix it in with, like I said, your already potting mix that you're using. However, too much compost may result in waterlogging and poor aeration for the roots. So in your pots, if it becomes waterlogged, those roots can get a disease very quickly, and we want to try to prevent that. So sometimes it's best, especially for potted plants, because it's such a, you can easily overwater those plants. There's not a lot of drainage. You want a completely pasteurized compost, and you can heat the material in an oven at about 160 degrees Fahrenheit for 30 minutes. So it's a very low temperature for about 30 minutes. It'll kill all the pathogens that could be in there, and then you can use it in your potting soil. That's the best practices. I've never done that. I just mix it in, and my plants have been fine. However, I will say my pots do have really good drainage. Also, you can use it as a mulch. If you have an area that you're trying to mulch, you can use your compost in a 3 to 6 inch layer to suppress weeds, reduce soil erosion, modify the soil temperatures, and conserve soil moisture. So the soil environment beneath the mulch is favorable for earthworms, and those guys are valuable for aerating the soil. So it saves you money if you're mulching. It improves the soil fertility, saves water, and protects the environment. So if for some reason you have an excess of compost, put it in an area and allow it to be a mulch. For sake of time, we are not going to watch this video, but that might be another cool program for Brooklyn to do, is vermicomposting, and talking about making a worm composter. So there's you just take a tote and you drill some holes in it around the top so they can have air, and you put some newspaper in it with some earthworms, and then that's where you throw all of your composting things like your fruits and vegetable waste, and they just go to town, and they create what we call black gold, which is the worm castings, and it's so great. Again, I had one until I forgot about it and it dried out. I was very sad, very upset. So some frequently asked questions: does compost have any value as a fertilizer? Yes, it does. Because the materials have some nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium content, it cannot, completely eliminate fertilizer in a garden, but it can be used as a source of nutrients. So going into the second question here, can compost be used as a substitute for fertilizer in the garden? It is a source, however, there are not enough nutrients present in the compost to supply the needs for vegetable crops. A lot of our vegetable crops require, higher nitrogen, so you want to make sure that you're meeting those needs. Always doing a soil test to see what nutrients you have in the soil and what nutrients are needed. Is it necessary to add lime to the compost pile? It is not necessary, and if you overdo it, too much lime can cause a loss of nitrogen. So most finished compost will have a near neutral pH. Is it necessary to add inoculum? We talked about that, and it does prepare the microbes and hasten the process, but if you just do that handful of soil, or cup and a half or whatever soil in there, that's definitely going to help inoculate it. You don't have to buy like a commercialized inoculate for your compost. Is it necessary to shred materials for the compost pile? Is it necessary? No. Is it better? Yes. So the finer the material is, the quicker it's going to go through decomposition. Like you're already, you're doing the hard work for those microbes. And when is the compost ready to use? When the pile returns to normal temperature and the organic material crumbles easily. So at this point, you should be able to recognize, or you should not be able to recognize the material that you put into the pile. If you can pick out a banana peel, it's not ready. Or if you can, identify, the outline of a leaf, it is not ready. So you want to make sure that it is completely mixed, and the average pile takes about 6 to 8 months. But if you tend to it and you are really on it and all the conditions are correct, you can have compost in as little as 8 weeks. What can you do to remember to have compost at home? Like I said before, some people have a container inside that you've put food scraps in, and then you can empty it into the pile every so often. So by having it in your home, you kind of see it every day, you walk by it. One lady told me in a previous class that she has a Ziploc bag that she puts in her freezer. So she's like, I don't have, a lot very often, but, I'll just put it in my freezer so it doesn't like go bad. And then, once that bag's full, I'll just go dump the whole thing in my pile. And how can you influence others to do the same? Sharing your compost is a great way to get others interested in it. So, share the wealth, share the love if you have an abundance of compost. And, what can be done in your community to encourage it? Implementing small changes one at a time throughout your household can definitely help, and it'll become second nature. So just sharing your successes and sharing your knowledge is going to increase that composting community. Kind of like here in Newton County, we are hopefully in the future going to start a countywide composting initiative to have a centralized location where people can come bring their yard waste, bring their compostable scraps and things like that to be composted in a really large pile with people that are monitoring it, and then we'll have great compost at the end. So these are some of the sources we can actually look at it. UGA does have a publication, and it's Composting and Mulching. It talks about aeration. It goes deeper into that carbon to nitrogen ratio. It has the 3 bins that we talked about. Other uses for compost, and So that one's a really great publication to utilize. And then this one is actually from Georgia Department of Community Affairs. This is just a brochure that you can print off, and it talks about real quickly what to compost, what not to compost, directions, doing a fast compost, composting in a bucket, worm composting. So, this is a really good one to get quick facts from, to read through quickly if you are interested or if somebody asks you about composting. And this last one is it's a group called Drawdown Georgia, and they have a really great website, and it talks about home composting. What is home composting? There's all kinds of tips and tricks, but what's really cool is they have a how to compost at home toolkit, and you click on that, and it talks about different municipality supports, talks about what composting is all about, private sectors, quick tips and links. I mean, it really goes in depth on all of the things composting. Are there private composting services in Georgia? Yes. Talks more about vermicomposting and frequently asked questions, selecting a compost bin. Can a compost catch fire? That is a question. So this is a really great resource that Drawdown Georgia has put together, and you can definitely learn more. You can get as deep into composting as you'd like, and there's 1,000 ways to get to that awesome black gold compost that we really, really like and we really enjoy. So try it out. If for you and your family it may be trial and error. There is a science behind it, but it's not necessarily a super exact science. You can have success in many different ways composting at home. And with that, I will ask if there are any questions.